Our next presenter this evening for his qualifying speech is Bob Andersen. The title of his speech is Spare Yourself the Lawsuit. Spare Yourself the Lawsuit, Bob Andersen.
Thank you. First of all, let's stand up and shake a leg. And would you please move towards the center with your other leg? And if you have a third leg, shake it too. Just get a little blood circulating in your system here. Feel free to move closer to the center of the room.
I'm gonna do it.
$5,000. What a ridiculous offer. I want my day in court. How many of you have ever thought about filing a lawsuit against somebody? How many of you have had somebody file a lawsuit against you? How many of you have had a good experience with a lawsuit? I don't see one hand. What I'm here to tell you about tonight is an alternative to a lawsuit. You can spare yourself the lawsuit and actually, possibly, come out better for it than going through and winning in trial. What am I talking about? I'm talking about mediation. Some of you may have never heard the term mediation, so let me define it. What is mediation? It is a three-party transaction. You've got one party who's mad at a second party, and the third party is the go-between to try to make peace. In other words, try to negotiate a settlement. It's different than a negotiation because in a negotiation you just have two people. You get together with somebody you have a disagreement with and you work things out. That's a negotiation. It's not a mediation. A mediation is where you bring a third person in and have them go as a go-between to try to settle the case. It's also very different than a trial or an arbitration. In a trial or arbitration, a judge makes a decision. Both parties are stuck with it. That's exactly what is trying to be avoided in a mediation. In a mediation, you're trying to get two parties to agree on a mutually acceptable solution. Now, if you know much about lawsuits, by the way, I've been an attorney for 34 years, and I've done a lot of civil litigation, so I know a lot about the litigation system. And the litigation system, you don't always get parties to agree. That's why the civil litigation system has to have some system to decide disputes if you can't agree. Hence, you have judges, you have courts, you have trials to go through, and a judge makes a decision. However, there are some very good reasons why mediation is superior to the lawsuit. But you do have to get an agreement between the two parties. Now, what are some examples of cases where you could have mediations? Have you ever heard of a situation where a parent dies and one brother disagrees with the sister on how the parent's assets should be distributed? Yeah, is that a possibility? How about two partners in business that got along great, but slowly they went different directions, and now they are at each other's throats. One wants to spend a lot of money and make the company big. One wants to spend nothing because the other guy spends it all, and they have financial fights or fights on whatever issue. Is that a possibility? Have you ever run into a dispute in your own life where you just disagree with somebody and you really don't get along because you fundamentally disagree with them? You can have a mediator without a lawsuit. Just bring somebody in to try to resolve the case, just to resolve the issue without a lawsuit. You don't have to have a lawsuit to have a successful mediation. But what basically I want to talk about tonight is several reasons why mediation is actually superior to litigation. The first reason is costs. Now, you might think when somebody does something that you get mad at, you might go in and talk to the attorney and ask the question, how much is this going to cost? And he says, well, $2,500 to get started. And what you hear is $2,500. Well, that's not necessarily the total cost of the litigation. Litigation can be quite expensive. Now, some people ask me, well, give me some range of what litigation can cost. The problem is that the vast range of litigation can be, from $500 to multi-million-dollar lawsuits. They are just so different. It's impossible to give you a feeling for how much a lawsuit costs. But let me give you an example. If an attorney charges $250 an hour and the trial is 1 day, how much does a day of trial cost? Right? $2,000 for 1 day of trial. Now, if you have a 1-day trial, does that mean the cost of litigation is $2,000? No, you're right. You know that answer. First of all, you have the pleading stage, which means you have to write down in a formal document what you're complaining about. It's called the complaint. And the defendant gets an opportunity to respond to the complaint, commonly called an answer. And the pleading stage can go back and forth for quite a while, depending on how clear and articulate the plaintiff is, or how much the defendant just wants to get through that part of the stage. The second major stage is the discovery stage, and this can be a real problem. What do you contend happened? Like, let's say you get in a personal injury action, and you go through the light, and you say, the light was green going my way. Well, what does the other person say? Does the other person say, well, the light was green going my way? Or more normally, even if the light was green, but I went through that light on a yellow light before you started, in just a little bit different perspective. And so you've got the whole discovery phase, even before you get to the trial. And, assuming you win the trial, how do you prevent the other side from filing an appeal? So the financial costs of litigation can run into the thousands of dollars. I had a case recently which was scheduled for a 2-day trial. It turned out, unbeknownst to me, and my client was totally hostile to this, the trial went 6 days for no fault of my client, and I don't think I was at fault. It was just the other side was very inefficient in how they did their case, and the judge let them get away with it. So a 2-day trial, which, if we go back to our original calculation of $2,000 a day, that was expected to be $4,000, all of a sudden goes to $12,000, and nobody expected it. And that's just the cost of the trial itself, not the trial preparation or any of that. So the financial costs are huge, but there are 3 other costs that most people don't even consider, and sometimes they're worse than the financial costs. The second cost is what I would call time. Do you have anything better to do with your time? How many of you are busy? How many of you would like to take time out of your schedule to have the joy and delight of going through a lawsuit? Once you're in a lawsuit, you don't realize how much time it takes until you're in it. And it takes a lot of time answering those interrogatories. You may have to skip a vacation in order to answer some interrogatories, answer some questions from the other side. Or sometimes they want 500 documents, and you have to go find and copy 500 documents. What a waste of time. So time is a factor, and when you file the lawsuit, until the time the lawsuit is actually heard or decided, even forgetting about the appeal, it can be a year or two. to even get to trial. I've had many clients that are come in the first day, they're ready to tell their story right then. They want to tell their story. But no, you have to wait for trial 2 years from now. And they're sitting there, when do I get a chance to tell my story? When do I get a chance to tell my story? And they just can't do it until you get to trial. That's the time when the judge hears both sides and decides who's right. And that frustrates many people because they think, okay, I filed a lawsuit, I'm ready to tell my story, when do I tell it? Surprise! There's a third cost, what I'm going to call an opportunity cost. How many of you are in business, or make money, or do things that you actually would like to do, but you may be prevented by something from doing it? Those of you who are starting up a new business, you realize that there are many things to do, and there are things that you have to do to get the business running. After you get the business running, there are many things you have to do to keep the business running. If you have to spend time on a lawsuit, there's an opportunity cost that you lose. You lose the ability to make money just because you're trying to prevent losing money in a lawsuit. The fourth cost is one that most people don't consider, but I think many times is the worst cost of all. And that is the cost of stress. You can't buy your way out of stress. Your body accepts the stress, and you have to deal with it. And if you've got an argument with your partner for the last 30 years, and you have to wait for 2 years to get this over with, the stress can be quite intensive and can start causing medical problems and social problems. You may not be nice to be around during this time. You want to tell your story to everybody about how terrible the American legal system is. So those are 4 costs of litigation that, if you can come to an agreement quickly, you can avoid all of those. That's the first reason why mediation is better than litigation. There's another reason, and this is the reason I like the most. That is, you might be able to solve the problem. Have you ever considered that as a possibility? You know, you go down and you talk to an attorney, you file a lawsuit, and you think you're going to solve the problem. Even if you win, you may not solve the problem. The judge may split the difference. The judge may give you, let's say the judge gives you a judgment for $25,000, and then you find out later, well, why they have to pay me $25,000? No, you just have a judgment for $25,000. You have to go find their money and then use the court process in order to get the money. They're not just going to voluntarily give you the $25,000. So you have totally won, and it has done you absolutely no good. In a mediation, you can actually solve the problem. Let me tell you one from today. I was in a mediation today. I'm a professional mediator, and I had a mediation today. It went long, but it was a probate. Well, it was a conservatorship. The conservatee thought that the conservator spent too much money. So they were fighting over how much money they should be spent. But what was the real problem? The decision the judge makes is, was it correct in how much money was spent? That's the decision the judge has to make. It's either right or wrong. She either gets credit for payment or she has to pay it back. That's it. But what's the problem in the case? The problem in the case was that the money was going to run out. And we could design a solution to make the money last a little bit longer so that the conservatorship could go and help this lady just a little bit longer by figuring out ways of cutting down on the costs of doing this litigation. That is an example of how you can actually try to solve the problem. Let me give you another example. I love this reason so much. I want to convince you that mediation is superior, not only because of the financial cost. Mother and daughter had a dispute over father-husband. The father-husband was getting Alzheimer's. How do you take care of an Alzheimer's patient? The mother wanted to try some alternative medicine methods. The daughter, who was in charge, says, "Come on, Mom, the doctor says I have to do this." Well, if you go to trial, the judge is almost certainly going to decide that what the doctor says is what you've got to do. So we talked about it, and we tried to figure out a way of trying an alternative medicine solution, but put a financial limit on it so you don't just sign a blank check, but still give them an opportunity to see if this alternative medicine solution would work. I got a letter from that daughter about 3 weeks later that says, "This is the first time in a long time I've agreed with my mother on something." And it was a real heartfelt thank you for solving a tense family issue that nobody wanted, that nobody really caused, but we could at least come up with a solution that might work and at least have the mother and daughter on the same page. And that is how you can actually attempt to solve the problem. Judges can't always solve the problem. Realize this, that judges can't always solve the problem, even though you're in the middle of litigation. The judge can say, okay, $504,000 goes to you, but does that solve the problem? Before you get involved in litigation, think of that question. Is the problem actually being solved? There's another reason why mediation is better than a lawsuit. This is almost too obvious, but it's got to be stated. You could lose the lawsuit. It is amazing how many people go into this thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to win this lawsuit. But if you have two parties, what's the percentage probability you might lose? You would be surprised how many people lose lawsuits that didn't think they were going to lose lawsuits. Isn't it better to come out with some acceptable solution, maybe not the ideal solution, but something that's acceptable to both parties, that you can live with, that you can still be friends with that person, somehow solve the problem, and not take the risk of going through all that expense, all that time, all that stress, and then come out with nothing. So I think for 3 reasons, mediation is vastly superior to litigation. And if you'll recall, nobody raised their hand when I asked how many liked the lawsuit. It is rare for somebody to come out of a lawsuit actually enjoying the lawsuit. I had one mediation once where there were 2 parties that one was asking for money from the other. The real culprit in the case was a third party who wasn't even in the room. Neither one really did anything wrong. It was a third party, and in law we have this question, as between 2 innocent parties, who has to bear the risk of loss? Well, one of the 2 was going to lose in the lawsuit. We actually worked it out so that one hired the other, and they both went away ecstatically happy. That I have, mediations don't always wind up with both parties ecstatically happy, but it can happen if you actually solve the problem. So I would like to convince you, spare yourself the lawsuit. Consider mediation. When might you use mediation? Actually, you can use it whenever there's a dispute. If you don't feel comfortable in negotiating, if somebody is just pushy and you're not, and you need somebody in the middle, if the emotions are just raging and you know if you say something, somebody's going to get in trouble and it's probably going to be you, and it'd be nice to have somebody in the middle between you, there's an example of where you could have a mediator. All a mediator is a peacemaker who's sitting there trying to come up with ideas to solve the problem. To make it so that both parties can actually come out with a solution so that they can go on with their life, live it happily, and they might even be friends or business partners at the end of the mediation. Who knows what's going to happen? For those of you who are storytellers, and how many Toastmasters are not storytellers? Every mediation is a story. Every single one. If you're interested in learning stories, unfortunately as a mediator you can't tell the stories sometimes, but it's fascinating to see the situations people wind themselves up in, and finally, somehow, they come to a solution. So I would like to convince you to put mediation into your arsenal. Understand what the word means. Understand that it might actually be a better solution for you than litigation. Some of you may have never been involved in litigation and may not know the real costs. So spare yourself the lawsuit. Consider mediation.
Thank you, Bob. As I listen to Bob, don't go anywhere. As I listen to Bob's speech, there's some people I'd like to recommend him to because there's an upcoming lawsuit. They could use mediation. Comments from Cindy.
I'll start with the suggestions for improvement. I'll end on what I really like, Bob. When you said to everybody to stand up and shake a leg, I would recommend that Charles do that so it doesn't have to be your opening. Yeah. Because you have a good opening, but Charles could have done that for you as an MC and just said, hey, I would like everybody to move together. So I would do that so you could say that great opening that you had. You asked us a lot of questions. Is that a possibility? I didn't have enough time in my own head to answer the question before we moved on. So there were several questions such as, have you ever been involved in a lawsuit? I wanted that longer pause and I didn't get it. So quite a few times I wanted longer pause. I didn't know, see, I kept expecting something to go onto the blue screen. So, yeah, I don't know why it wasn't turned off. I kept thinking that maybe we were going to use the PowerPoint and that was why it was on. I don't know. The good part, Bob, I'm convinced to use mediation the next time I have a problem. And up until right now, today, until you gave the talk, I didn't even give it a possibility of a thought to use mediation. So you convinced me. So I think that's awesome that you convinced me. And the thing that I think I love the most, you're a lawyer with emotion. You actually care that you solve somebody's problem. My God, I mean, I heard this. I heard true sincerity when you said, you had all this emotion and you said you solved this mother and daughter's problem, and you seem like you care, right? We have lawyer jokes because you guys don't seem like you care. So not only did you convince me that I should use mediation, you convinced me that I should use you because you care. I'm not
Who's next? Randy.
Hi, Bob. Glad you on to what was just said by Cindy. The only comment that I would have is to latch on to that emotion. I look for the connection when we're speaking to audiences and giving them reason to listen to the person initially. And aside from the distraction, the screen and all that, you took center stage. And like she said, if we had gotten everybody where you wanted them ahead of time, you were ready to perform when you went on stage. If you would use that story in your opening about that mother and daughter and explain why mediation is so powerful and should be so important to you, and make that emotional connection early on in your talk, then you really will bring that home for people. And it does a lot of things for you. It shows your emotion and your passion. It helps you connect the audience instantly. You got them through the whole presentation. Thank you.
Tom?
I thought the opening was a little confusing. I don't know, where is this guy going with all this stuff? And you, now you explained that. I think what complex stuff, you can't possibly cover in 15, 20 minutes. You spent, I think, too much time on the problem, not enough time for the mitigation part of the problem, which you wanted to get across. But what you did tell us was useful, I thought, very useful information. I don't think you could use any visual aids to help us understand some of that legalistic stuff that we hear but we don't see, whether that would help. But if you did that, you'd have to make the talks longer because you got more information. I thought the information was worthwhile. I didn't do that job today.
Michael?
The dreaded blue screen. Those of you who use computers, that's the one colour you don't want to see. I only have one tiny little point, and I say this to a lot of speakers. Stand up and say, I want to talk to you about something, and in parentheses I'm going to put that I'm not going to. I'm going to talk to you. That's it, not I want to, I'm going to talk to you. I will look every minute at what you say, and I would say do not use visual aids. You have a voice that people can listen to comfortably, believe it or not. A few more pauses is the only next I'd say, and that is the same, we had that before. Because some of us, it takes time for the brain matter to process what you just said. Yes, I'm bilingual. I'm British English, I know.
Any other QS comments? Terry?
Hi, Bob. I thought it was a good speech. I think you said I would like to convince you about 5 times. Or 10 times maybe. So especially at the end. So just tell them what you're going to tell them, basically. And I think we were already convinced by that time. The only other thing I would suggest is that you move a little more instead of standing in one specific area. If you just move a little bit more, that would probably help you outside. Other than that, I think I agree with what you said.
Okay, if there are no other QS comments, thank you, Bob.